Hi, grade 4. You've been working on converting different units of measurement. And one of the things that makes this really hard is that we're taking pieces of knowledge and understanding from different areas of math and using them all at the same time. Not only do we need to know what the metric prefixes are, we need to know the different units of measurement, grams, liters, and meters. We also need to know decimal numbers. We need to understand place value and how that works. And we need to understand the connection between the different kinds of place values. We need to use our decimals. And so when we need to put all of this information together, it can make converting between different units of measurement challenging. In fact, I've started recording this video for you about 4 times already, because each time I start to explain, I realize that actually there are different ways of doing this. So for today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best explaining for you that I can, and then let's see if it might help us to answer these questions underneath. So today, I'm going to start by just a little bit of review. Okay, so the first thing that I want you to think about here is that if I want to talk about milliliters, and I want to be thinking about milliliters, I know that there are 1,000 milliliters in a liter, and it follows the place value system. There are 10 milliliters in a centiliter, there are 10 centiliters in a deciliter, and there are 10 deciliters in a liter. So in other words, it would take 1,000 milliliters to make a liter. And in fact, if I write that in here, 1,000 milliliters, 1,000 milliliters does give us exactly 1 liter. Another way to think about that would be if I took this liter and I divided the liter into 10 equal parts, then I would have a deciliter. If I divided a deciliter into 10 equal parts, I would have a centiliter. And if I divided a centiliter into 10 equal parts, I would have a milliliter. So if I wanted to write here that I have 10 centiliters, and sometimes people call that 10 cc's. We sometimes hear that in measurement. If you hear 10 cc's of medicine is required, then actually what we're looking at is 1 deciliter. 10 cc's, we put the 10 ending in the centiliter part, because we're talking about centiliters. But we can see that when we compare it to liters, it's 1/10 of a liter. Another way to say 1/10 of a liter is a deciliter. Let's go through a little bit of that one more time just to kind of make it clear, okay? So if I wanted to see how much 20 milliliters were, so because I'm talking about milliliters, I'm going to make sure that when I write my 20, it's going to finish in the milliliters column. Okay, 20 milliliters, if I look over here and I try to compare it to liters, well, this is where my decimal point would go. 2 centiliters, or 20 milliliters, is 2 hundredths of a liter. Let's do one more like that. Let's say that we had 47 milliliters. 47 milliliters, which is kind of a random amount of liquid to have. If I'm talking about milliliters, I'm going to write the 47 so that the last digit is in the milliliters spot. 47 milliliters is the same as 47 thousandths of a liter. Because remember, in place value, this is tenths. This place value would be hundredths. And this place value here would be thousandths. It is 47 thousandths of a liter. That's less than 1/10. In fact, it's less than half of 1/10. So let's see if we can't apply some of this thinking to answering the questions down below. Okay, so If we look at this first question here, 1A, the very first thing that I'm going to do in order to figure out how to answer this question is I'm going to look at what is the capacity of this container. And I see that the capacity is 100 milliliters. And I can see that it's divided up into 10 equal parts. That means that this container is going up. This is almost like a number line, and it's going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 milliliters up until 100. So I know that each of these little tick marks is equal to 1/10 of 100 milliliters. A tenth of 100 milliliters is 10 milliliters. And I can see here that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So therefore there are 5/10 of 100 milliliters, or 50 milliliters. Now, I would be making a mistake if I wrote here 50. Do you know why? It's because the unit of measure here is liters. 50 milliliters is very different from 50 liters. This is how we would write 50 liters. 50 milliliters, written in liters, I need to put in my zeros to hold the place. Therefore, the way that we would answer that question would be like this. 50 milliliters equals 5/100ths of a liter. Let's do the next one. Maybe this is starting to become clearer to you. I hope it is. In the next one as well, remember the first thing I look at is the capacity of the container. It's 100 milliliters. Again, we have the same scale. There are 10 tenths in here. A tenth of 100 milliliters is 10 milliliters. Each of these tick marks is 10 milliliters. I'm not going to count up from the bottom. I know that this is 10 milliliters. So this would be 90 milliliters. This is 80 milliliters. But 80 milliliters can't be written in liters just like that. If I wanted to find 80 milliliters, I would write it in here, 80 milliliters. Now, if I want to measure that in liters, then I need to put my zeros in as placeholders. So the volume of the water in this measuring cylinder is 8/100ths of a liter. When I look at this next one, I can see that it is 100 milliliters. If I write 100 milliliters here, then I can see that actually 100 milliliters is equal to a deciliter, or 1/10 of a liter. And finally here, this is equivalent to just 10 milliliters. It's the same scale and the same capacity, and all of these containers, there's only 10 milliliters here. If I want to show 10 milliliters, then I can write 10 milliliters so that my zero ends in the milliliters spot, or place value. It is like using place value, and then I need to put zeros in as placeholders. Remember, that's the job of zero, is just to hold the place. So 0.01 or 100th of a liter is the same as 10 milliliters. Now when we look at number 2, however, we can see that the capacity is different. The capacity is different, but still the scale is the same. It means that this container has been broken up into 10 equal parts as well. But 1/10 of 500 milliliters is not 10 milliliters. 1/10 of 500 milliliters is 50 milliliters. So each of these little tick marks will be equal to 50 milliliters. Why? Because we know that anything divided by 10, you just move the place value over 1, and so we get 50 milliliters. I can erase that now. So we know that each of these tick marks is 50 milliliters. And in this first container, there's only one of them. 50 milliliters, we could write like that as milliliters. To write it as a liter, we need to put our zeros in as placeholders. So, 50 milliliters is 0.05 liters, or 5 hundredths of a liter, because remember, this is the hundredths place, 5 hundredths of a liter. In this next cylinder, again, it's a capacity of 500. Each of these tick marks is 50 milliliters, and it looks like we have 6 of them here. I'll count backwards, so that's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. There are 6 50 milliliters. 6 times 50 is 300. 300 milliliters, we would write like this. I hope you were thinking that. 300 milliliters, if I were to write it in liters, now these zeros are placeholders, but they're not really holding the place for anything. In fact, we don't need those zeros because there's nothing after it. So 300 milliliters is the same as 3/10 of a liter. I'm just going to write my milliliter measurement here as well, because it's helping me to remember the connection between them. Okay, 10 milliliters here. I'll fill in the ones back here, and that was 100 milliliters. In this cylinder of water, we can see that there is only 50 milliliters missing, which means this is 450 milliliters. If I write 450 milliliters, I would write it like this. So then to write it as liters, or to measure it in liters, we need to put in our zero placeholder. 450 milliliters is the same as 45 hundredths of a liter. And finally, 500 milliliters, if I wanted to write that down. 500 milliliters, we could say, is the same as 50 centiliters, or 5 deciliters, or 0.5 or 5/10 of a liter. Another way, of course, to say 5/10 of a liter is a half liter. So 500 milliliters is a half a liter, and that's a good unit of measurement to remember, a good unit conversion to remember. So there you go for L. Please look back at, and for H and for R, please look back at the work you did and ask any questions you might still have to your teacher.